Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, we dive into a chilling true crime story that highlights the dark side of human nature and the tragic consequences of misplaced trust. This case, known as The Price of Kindness, revolves around the tragic fate of Thomas Antonakos, a successful businessman and a loving father whose life was turned upside down by the disappearance of his beloved daughter, Kimberly Antonakos. Through this story, we will explore the intricacies of victimology, the study of crime victims, and how certain social and psychological factors can make individuals more susceptible to becoming victims. In March 1995, New York City was vibrant with the energy of a metropolis in full swing. Thomas Antonakos, a successful businessman in the tech industry, was living the American dream. However, his life took a devastating turn with the sudden disappearance of his beloved daughter, Kimberly Antonakos. At 21, Kimberly was a bright, kind-hearted young woman who had recently moved out of her father's home to embrace her independence. Despite Thomas's concerns, she was determined to chart her own path. On the morning of March 1st, alarm bells rang at Kimberly's workplace when she failed to show up. Known for her punctuality, her absence was immediately suspicious. Thomas, too, grew anxious when he couldn't reach her. Kimberly, always responsible, was in constant touch with her father, thanks to the cell phone he had gifted her. With mounting dread, Thomas reached out to Kimberly's friends, but none had seen her since she left a party early that morning. Desperate and fearing the worst, Thomas went to the police. However, law enforcement advised him to wait 24 hours, suggesting that Kimberly might simply be staying with a friend. Unconvinced and unwilling to wait, Thomas began his own search. His first stop was Kimberly's apartment, where he found her friends Liz Pace and Joshua Torres, who had been staying with her due to renovations at their own place. They, too, were baffled by her disappearance and expressed their concern. Thomas's next move was to check the parking lot near Kimberly's apartment. There, he found a small gold earring, a piece of jewelry he had given her. This discovery intensified his fears, and he returned to the police, insisting on immediate action. Despite their initial reluctance, a detective took an interest in the case, and the investigation officially began. Detectives began piecing together Kimberly's last known movements. On the evening of February 28th, she attended a party with Liz. They returned home around 4 a.m., but Kimberly didn't go inside, citing unfinished business. She drove away in her white Honda Accord, and that was the last time anyone saw her. The police conducted a thorough search of her apartment and the garage, but found no signs of struggle. The only clue was the earring found by Thomas. Kimberly's bank records showed no unusual activity, and her cell phone was inactive, ruling out the possibility of her running away. Detectives suspected foul play and began interviewing her friends and acquaintances. Liz and Joshua were questioned extensively. Joshua, who claimed to be like a brother to Kimberly, had made numerous calls from her landline on the morning of her disappearance. His explanation that he was trying to locate her seemed plausible, but something about his demeanor raised suspicions. Meanwhile, the investigation took an unusual turn when Kimberly's mother, in a state of desperation, consulted a psychic. The psychic claimed that Kimberly was alive but in grave danger, held by acquaintances. This information, though unconventional, was taken seriously by the investigators. As days passed with no significant leads, a breakthrough came when a report of a fire at an abandoned house in Queens led to the discovery of a charred body in the basement. The body, bound and showing signs of torture, was identified as Kimberly's through dental records. The autopsy revealed she had been alive during the fire, a horrifying detail that pointed to a brutal crime. With Kimberly's death confirmed, the focus shifted to finding her killers. Joshua Torres, living in Kimberly's apartment, became the prime suspect. His alibi and behavior during the initial investigation were scrutinized. Joshua's criminal record and connections to a gang came to light, strengthening the case against him. Further investigation revealed that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend, Julio Negrin, and his associates were involved. Julio, bitter over Kimberly's rejection, had orchestrated the kidnapping with Joshua. The gang's plan was to ransom Kimberly, But when their attempts to contact Thomas failed, they panicked and decided to eliminate her to cover their tracks. Detectives found crucial evidence in Joshua's pager messages and phone records. He had coordinated the crime from Kimberly's apartment while pretending to be concerned about her disappearance. Confronted with this evidence, Joshua cracked and implicated his accomplices, Julio Negrin, his cousin Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett. The details of Kimberly's captivity were horrifying. She was held in the basement of the abandoned house, deprived of food and water, and subjected to inhumane conditions. The gang's negligence led to her deteriorating health, and in a desperate move, they set the house on fire, hoping to destroy any evidence. With Kimberly's death confirmed, the investigation intensified. Detectives were determined to piece together the puzzle of her final days and bring her killers to justice. The prime suspect, Joshua Torres, was under intense scrutiny. His suspicious behavior and connection to Kimberly made him a key figure in the unfolding tragedy. The detectives reconstructed Kimberly's last known movements. On February 28th, she attended a party with her friend Liz. They returned home around 4 a.m., but Kimberly didn't go inside, citing unfinished business. She drove away in her white Honda Accord, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Joshua, who was staying at Kimberly's apartment, claimed to have no knowledge of her whereabouts after that night. However, his story had inconsistencies that the detectives found troubling. The investigation took a grim turn when a fire at an abandoned house in Queens led to the discovery of a charred body, later identified as Kimberly's. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive during the fire, bound and tortured before being set ablaze. This horrifying detail confirmed the brutality of the crime and the urgency to catch those responsible. Detectives focused on Joshua, who had a criminal record and gang connections. His behavior during the initial investigation raised red flags, and his alibi was shaky at best. Further probing into his activities revealed more about his dark past. Joshua's criminal history included child abduction, violence, and illegal weapon possession. His connections to a local gang painted a clearer picture of his involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, Kimberly's mother had consulted a psychic in desperation. The psychic claimed that Kimberly was alive but in grave danger, held by acquaintances. Although unconventional, this information was not dismissed by the detectives. They cross-referenced the psychic's insights with the facts at hand and found them disturbingly accurate. The psychic's mention of Kimberly being held by acquaintances who intended to ransom her added a new dimension to the investigation. Further digging revealed that Kimberly's ex-boyfriend, Julio Negrin, had a role in her disappearance. Julio, who had a tumultuous relationship with Kimberly, was bitter over her rejection. His involvement with Joshua and their shared criminal background made them prime suspects. Julio's cousin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, a gang member nicknamed Jay, were also implicated. Detectives pieced together the events leading to Kimberly's abduction. On the night of February 28th, Kimberly and Liz returned from the party. Kimberly drove away, supposedly for unfinished business. In reality, she was ambushed by Joshua, Julio, and their accomplices. They forced her into the trunk of her car and drove to the abandoned house in Queens. In the basement of the abandoned house, Kimberly was tied to a chair and left without food or water. The gang intended to ransom her, but their attempts to contact her father, Thomas, failed. Joshua had recorded a ransom message demanding $775,000, but technical issues prevented the message from reaching Thomas. Frustrated and fearing discovery, the gang decided to eliminate Kimberly. Joshua and his accomplices set the house on fire, hoping to destroy evidence of their crime. They believed Kimberly was already dead from dehydration and neglect. However, the autopsy revealed she had been alive when the fire started, a detail that added to the horror of her final moments. The investigation's breakthrough came when police examined Joshua's pager messages and phone records. These revealed his coordination with his accomplices during the abduction and captivity. Joshua's attempts to cover his tracks unraveled as detectives followed the digital trail. Confronted with the evidence, Joshua eventually cracked and implicated Julio, Jose, and Nicholas. As detectives delved deeper, they uncovered more about the gang's dynamics. Julio, driven by resentment, had orchestrated the kidnapping. Jose and Nicholas were involved in the execution of the plan. Their intent was to ransom Kimberly for money, but their plan fell apart when their ransom demands went unanswered. Detectives arrested the suspects, and the legal process began. The community was shocked by the brutality of the crime and the cold-blooded actions of the perpetrators. Thomas Antonakos, devastated by his daughter's death, pushed for justice, hoping that the killers would face the full weight of the law. As the investigation progressed, the detectives built a solid case against Joshua Torres and his accomplices. The digital evidence, combined with the forensic findings and the insights from the psychic, pointed clearly to their involvement. The community's shock turned into outrage as more details of Kimberly's suffering emerged. Joshua Torres, the prime suspect, was interrogated extensively. His attempts to cover his tracks and mislead the investigation only deepened the detectives' resolve. Joshua's criminal record and gang affiliations were critical in understanding the dynamics of the crime. Despite his initial denials, the mounting evidence forced him to confess his involvement and reveal the roles of his accomplices. Julio Negrin, Jose Negrin, and Nicholas Brett, also known as Jay. The interrogation of Julio Negrin was particularly revealing. Julio, who had once been romantically involved with Kimberly, harbored a deep-seated resentment after she rejected him. This personal vendetta became the catalyst for the crime. Julio admitted to planning the abduction, driven by a twisted sense of revenge and the lure of easy money through ransom. Jose Negrin, Julio's cousin, and Nicholas Brett, another gang member, were implicated through phone records and Joshua's confession. Nicholas, in particular, was identified as the one who proposed the final, fatal solution when the ransom demands failed. He suggested burning the house to eliminate any evidence, believing Kimberly was already dead. Detectives pieced together the harrowing timeline of Kimberly's captivity. After her abduction, she was taken to the abandoned house in Queens. There, she was bound and gagged, deprived of food and water. The gang's negligence led to her deteriorating condition. They periodically checked on her, but their primary focus was on extracting the ransom. Their attempts to contact Thomas Antonakos failed due to technical issues, and their frustration grew. On the fateful day, with Kimberly in critical condition, the gang decided to eliminate her to avoid detection. Nicholas and Jose procured gasoline and set the house ablaze, believing this would destroy all evidence. However, they did not anticipate the resilience of forensic investigation, nor did they realize Kimberly was still alive during the fire. The community was horrified by the revelations. Kimberly, a kind and trusting soul, had fallen victim to a brutal crime orchestrated by those she once considered friends. The psychic's insights, once dismissed by some as unconventional, were validated by the facts of the case. This added an eerie dimension to the investigation, highlighting the desperation and extraordinary measures taken by Kimberly's family. The legal proceedings were swift. The evidence against Joshua, Julio, Jose, and Nicholas was overwhelming. Their confessions, combined with forensic evidence and witness testimonies, painted a clear picture of their guilt. The prosecution emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime, the brutality of Kimberly's treatment, and the calculated decision to burn the house to cover their tracks. Joshua Torres, the ringleader, faced the harshest sentence. His betrayal of Kimberly's trust, coupled with his orchestration of the crime, left no room for leniency. He was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett, whose idea it was to burn the house, received the same sentence. Julio Negrin, whose personal vendetta sparked the crime, was sentenced to 30 years, taking into account his role in the planning and execution of the abduction. Jose Negrin, although less involved in the direct harm to Kimberly, was sentenced to 25 years for his part in the conspiracy and execution of the cover-up. The courtroom was a somber place as the sentences were read. Thomas Antonakos, though devastated by the loss of his daughter, found some solace in the justice served. He expressed his hope that the severe sentences would deter others from committing such heinous acts. His grief, however, remained a permanent scar, a reminder of the brutality that had claimed his daughter's life. The case of Kimberly Antonakos highlighted the dark side of human nature and the dangers of misplaced trust. It also underscored the importance of thorough investigation and the resilience of those seeking justice. The detective's dedication and the community's support played crucial roles in ensuring the perpetrators were held accountable. As the case concluded, the community reflected on the lessons learned. Kimberly's story became a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the harsh reality that sometimes those closest to us can harbor the darkest intentions. The quest for justice, though arduous, reaffirmed the resolve to protect the innocent and honor the memory of those lost to senseless violence. As the legal proceedings came to a close, the community's attention shifted to the aftermath of the case. The sentences handed down to Joshua Torres, Nicholas Brett, Julio Negrin, and Jose Negrin provided a measure of justice, but for Thomas Antonakos, the pain of losing his daughter, Kimberly, was a wound that would never fully heal. Yet, in his grief, Thomas found a new purpose, advocating for victims' rights and ensuring that Kimberly's story would serve as a cautionary tale. Joshua Torres, the mastermind behind the heinous crime, began his 58-year sentence in a maximum security prison. His life in incarceration was a far cry from the freedom he once exploited. The severity of his sentence reflected the premeditated nature of his actions and the betrayal of trust that compounded his guilt. Joshua's presence in the criminal justice system became a symbol of the consequences awaiting those who commit such brutal acts. Nicholas Brett, who had played a critical role in the crime by suggesting the fire that ultimately led to Kimberly's death, received the same lengthy sentence as Joshua. His time in prison was marked by the stigma of his actions, as other inmates and the prison staff were aware of the details of his crime. The isolation and remorse Nicholas experienced were fitting punishments for his role in the tragedy. Julio Negrin, driven by personal vendetta and resentment, was sentenced to 30 years. His time behind bars forced him to confront the devastating impact of his actions. The bitterness that had fueled his involvement in Kimberly's abduction and death turned into a prolonged period of reflection and regret. Julio's case underscored the dangers of letting personal grievances escalate into criminal actions. Jose Negrin, the least involved in the direct harm to Kimberly but still complicit in the crime and cover-up, was sentenced to 25 years. His imprisonment served as a reminder that even those on the periphery of such heinous acts are not immune to severe consequences. Jose's lesser sentence, while still significant, reflected his more limited role but did not absolve him of his guilt. Thomas Antonakos channeled his grief into advocacy, using his resources to support organizations dedicated to preventing similar tragedies. He spoke at community events, sharing Kimberly's story to raise awareness about the dangers of misplaced trust and the importance of vigilance. Thomas's efforts highlighted the need for better support systems for victims and their families. The psychic's role in the investigation remained a point of intrigue and controversy. While some dismissed it as a coincidence, others saw it as a testament to the lengths a desperate parent would go to find answers. The insights provided by the psychic, while unconventional, had contributed to the direction of the investigation and kept hope alive during the darkest days. The case also prompted a reevaluation of police protocols in handling missing persons reports. The initial 24-hour waiting period suggested by law enforcement had delayed the investigation, a factor that potentially impacted the outcome. As a result, policies were reviewed and adjusted to ensure quicker responses in similar situations in the future. Kimberly's story, though tragic, became a beacon for change. Her life, full of potential and kindness, was cut short by a senseless act of violence. But her legacy lived on through the lessons learned and the reforms inspired by her case. The community, once shocked by the brutality of her death, rallied to support Thomas and honor Kimberly's memory. In the years following the trial, the Antonakos family continued to feel the ripple effects of the tragedy. Thomas's health declined, and in 2005 he passed away from cancer. His family believed that the stress and heartache from losing Kimberly had taken a toll on his health. Despite the sadness of his passing, Thomas's legacy of advocacy and resilience continued to inspire others. The sentences served by Joshua, Nicholas, Julio, and Jose did not bring Kimberly back, but they ensured that her killers faced the consequences of their actions. The justice system had spoken, and the community hoped that the harsh penalties would deter others from committing similar crimes. Kimberly Antonakos' story remains a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of protecting those we love. It underscores the need for vigilance, community support, and a relentless pursuit of justice for victims of crime. As the community healed, they carried forward the memory of Kimberly, ensuring that her spirit of kindness and trust was remembered not as a weakness, but as a testament to her character. Thank you for joining us for this sobering tale. Stay tuned for more true crime stories as we continue to uncover the complexities of human nature and the pursuit of justice.